So hello everyone. My name is Clifford, and today I'm going to be analyzing the game between Ben Magana versus Oluka Robert Mcligeyo. Both candidate masters, both very strong players, rated above 2000. Mcligeyo rated above 2100. The difference may look small, but the higher you go, the difference between uh, the gap kind of has a bigger impact. What I'm saying is the difference between a 1400 and a 1600 is much smaller compared to the gap between a 2000 rated and probably a 2100 rated player, because the higher you get, the harder it becomes to improve your rating. So there's probably going to be a reason why one is a lot stronger than the other. So anyway, Mcligeyo is the favorite to win this game, and he's facing his team captain in Ben Magana. I assume he's the team captain for KCB. But let's see how the game goes. So Magana plays d4, and Magana is one of those players who he plays the exact same thing every single time, and he asks you to prove him wrong. And I assume he has been playing the London for so long, but there's probably no line that you're going to come up that he hasn't faced before. So Mcligeyo responds with knight to f6, which you could argue that it's a very flexible move, but it also allows white to play whatever they want. They can play something like the Troposki to shock you. They can just go for the Queen's Gambit straight. They can choose whatever they want. But again, it also makes you flexible as black, because you're not really saying what setup you're going to, and you're not really committing anything just yet. So Magana plays bishop to f4, officially entering the London setup. And Mcligeyo plays this c5 move, which looks like a hanging pawn. But if you ever take this pawn, I can just go with queen a5 check. And whatever way you choose to block this, I'm just going to win back the pawn. And at the end of it, I have two central pawns, and you have one central pawn. And this may not be such a big advantage, but this is kind of where you can start building an advantage and start out playing your opponent with subtle things like this. So here, Mcligeyo, of course, Magana does not take the pawn. He goes for e3. I don't think you expect at the national championship for someone to make such a poor strategic mistake. I even think that even if you come up with like some 20 move theory line here, probably whatever black plays is going to be okay for a while. And there are going to be variations maybe you have not studied or something of the sort, so it's probably not worth it. So Magana just centralizes with e3. He could have also played c3, whichever he wanted. He could also choose to push, but this looks a bit tricky, especially the bishop out here. I'm not sure about the theory here. So Mcligeyo plays queen to d6, and this is again in d4 openings. This is a very common theme whenever you develop your bishops, the bad bishops. So for example here, since white has already developed the c1 bishop, the b2 pawn is very weak, and this is something that I often talk to my USAID teammate Baden. I always tell him grabbing the b pawns and the g pawns is the most risky thing you can do in chess. It's something that you have to actually calculate, because this is where actually you can find you're getting trapped, and it's not even really clear that you're getting trapped. Or at the very least, let's say the knight was not here, the knight came here, and you grabbed here. You can already see that maybe white is gaining a lot of critical tempos, you might say, and the position is already starting to look a bit tense. Now, me, I'm not even sure if these lines work, but this is technically how I like playing. uh, I like playing like this personally. If you ever tell me that I can gambit two pawns to have a position like this, there's going to be a part of me that's going to say that's risky, but just know the chances are not the chances are low, but the chances are never zero. This position to me looks like this looks like a position ripe for an immortal game, and I like stuff like that. Because yeah, white black is up 2 pawns, And you can argue you can just play something like e6, but that's not how development works. Development works because you can argue that after a while, after you castle, you will find that the person whose attack can come really, really quickly is white. And right now you might be sitting there smiling that you're up a pawn. The engine is probably saying that black is better, but like white's attack is not something you can sneeze at because you're down like 3 or 4 tempo, and that also counts. But here, so Magana picks this knight to a3 move, and here Mcligeyo plays d6, and the reason he's playing d6. Now I've looked at this with an engine before because I was really struggling myself. I'm not going to act like I'm an expert of this line because I don't play the London. But I've actually seen that Mcligeyo could actually have grabbed the pawn here. But the idea is that this is pretty risky. Now, the thing is, the difference between this and probably most of Queen's Gambit lines is that often this rook is hanging. But here the rook is not hanging because we've actually developed our dark squared bishop, which we would not have done in most Queen's Gambit lines. And another difference is that once a knight lands here, which is the best move for white, I don't know if there are other moves, we're threatening to go here with check, and we just pick up the rook in the corner, and then probably also still threatening another check. But I don't see any good prospects there, but we're threatening these things. And also, if you look at black's queen has cannot go here, it cannot go here, it cannot go here, it cannot go here, it cannot take a rook, it cannot come here, it cannot come any of these squares. The black queen has only this square. So we're going to start with queen to b5 check, because you might say that you want to get your queen out of there as soon as possible, but the problem is once c3 comes, wherever you go now, it is too late. You cannot stop this move because the knight is defended. That is line one I want us to think about, because all of these things come to, they come to uh, these various lines, they all come and converge somewhere. All these different ideas, they can come and converge eventually. So here is another line that I personally considered, when I was trying to understand myself. I can just play knight to a6, and if the bishop could somehow jump here and take here, we could still go for the fork and pick up the rook and probably get our knight out. So we can be up a rook. Maybe we don't have our bishop here, but I think a rook is enough compensation here. So we continue with this line. Let's look at this. So the problem with this is that we've used one move here. You've used one move here, and the problem is in this position. There are two problems that white is facing. Problem number one is this check that we seem to have guarded here. But problem number two is that this queen does not have any squares. And we saw that the one move that it had to escape was queen here with check, and then probably pick here and run away. And you can say that you're up a pawn and probably try to defend for your life. So we can play this move a3. And now here, without an engine, if you sit here and you're probably looking at your queen, you're saying that there's no threat just yet, but there's actually a threat. If you try playing something extremely slow like this, I can go just rook here, and you can say I'm extremely safe here. I'll just find a way out. Then the opponent plays something like this, and all of a sudden, knight here traps your queen. There's no escape square for your queen, and you have to give up your queen, right? So as you can see here, white has some very nasty ideas with this pawn. Now I'm sure both Magana and Mcligeyo already know this theory, but Mcligeyo plays this d6 move, and now the reason I wanted to slow down and go back to all of these lines is because now you can see something has changed in this position. Now the bishop is no longer covering the square. So for example, the mistake that Magana makes here with c3, which by the way, when I was looking at this game, Mcligeyo kind of paused here. I remember, yeah, he slowed down here. And that's something that tells you how well this Mcligeyo's openings are, because he immediately notices this a mistake. So after he grabs here, if we continue with our normal lines, you can see, actually, it's not really clear to me again. I may need to turn on an engine here again. But here, I think the problem was, this was a move, but now he has committed this here, and you're probably thinking that there's probably a way. Let's play a stupid move. Let's see if something has changed here. And so the knight does not have the c3 square to come back and trap this guy, right? But another way maybe we can try and find a way to do this is maybe bishop to c4, so that if the rook comes here and here, maybe we are threatening some funny things here. But again, it looks very complicated and tricky. But generally speaking, this square has been taken from the knight. So Magana calculates all this, and he decides that he's just down a pawn, and he's just going to concede it. I've actually started to remember the line. I'm sorry. That's how sharp this is. So the line I think that I was looking at is actually white does not play knight to a6. White plays this move. And now white is attacking this pawn, and most critically, white is attacking this pawn twice. Most critically. So you don't have time to go for this knight check. If you go for knight check, this is a free knight, because you have to defend against checkmate. So after you block, I'm just going to pick up your knight, and you're going to tell me why you did that. So that's the subtleties of this d6 move. So I'm guessing that Magana saw all of this. He saw even knight to e4, and he was like, there's no reason to fight this. He just went here and traded, and now he's down a pawn. And then so this is just going to be like a 50 move squeeze, and I have already used so much of my time here, because I often set 15 minutes to, I didn't even start the timer. Oh my god. I often set 15 minutes to analyze games, and I've done way more than that. This is probably like 40 minutes now. So I'll try to go through this as quickly as possible. I hope I've kind of explained why this d6 move, it is very subtle, but it actually threatens to pick up this pawn. And that is very nasty, because it's like something you would see until like 4 moves. And I know 4 moves sounds very little, but these are like 4 very branching moves. But if you understand the ideas, it actually makes a lot of sense. So Magana continues with this idea, and I don't know if Mcligeyo can actually just play rook there, I'm guessing, or even king here. Yes, this d6 move seems to be what won Mcligeyo this game. But it's still not over. The reason I'm saying this is not over is because white's pieces are extremely active, and black's pieces, they seem to be stumbling upon each other. So here, if I'm Ben Magana, I would be looking to play this and this, because this diagonal is a bit loose, especially since Mcligeyo committed the c5 move. Because if this pawn was still here, you could play c6 and neutralize the bishop here. But maybe you can also argue that if you put the bishop here, black has time to put their bishop here. But let's see what happens. Mcligeyo kicks out the knight, and he expands on the queen side, which are again still ideas that are very common in d4 openings, in queen's pawns openings. So they just continue developing pieces. Magana castles. His king is safe, but when the queens are off the board, it's not such a requirement to do that. And Mcligeyo just takes up space. And normally playing moves like this are pretty risky, because the opponent can play b3, and they can compromise the defense of your pawn, make it very hard to keep, and all that. And these are not like this is a blunder or like 2 moves or something. But when position moves like b3 are moves that slowly weaken the position, and eventually the opponent either crumbles, or there's potentially no way to actually hold on to the structure that you have. But the key difference is that Magana does not have a pawn to contest this. It was stolen. So in this position, Magana is just going to be void of space, and he's probably going to have to look for very tricky ways to hold on to this. And Mcligeyo is just putting a lot of pressure. See Magana's bishop here, his knight just stuck here defending the pawn, while Mcligeyo's knight is pretty good, and his pieces are stuck just guarding each other. And even though Magana is the one who had the advantage with piece development when it started, it just looks like all these pieces they're scrambling to get out of space here. And this pawn looks weak here. It does, but it's also taking up so much space of the white pieces. So this bishop, for example, doesn't have like any really logical square to go to. And Mcligeyo is just squeezing him, and he's using the advantage. And Mcligeyo is just giving up pawns here, man. Of course, these are pawns that if you take, they will ruin your structure and all that. But you have to understand that this position is extremely squeezing black's position, and you have to sit here and actually try and find subtle ways to take advantage of this position. The problem with black's position is that with white's position is that black's weak pawn is actually doing a very good job of making this guy a prisoner. And also the knight is also kind of in prison because he doesn't really have a lot of good squares to go to. So we have g4, and the bishop finally gets out, but let's see for how long that can go on. So this weak pawn, now maybe you're probably thinking of coming here to attack. Maybe knight here, but again, there's potential for a pin here, and you have to be cautious of moves like this. So he chooses to trade, and Mcligeyo is not even allowing him to ever come and try and contest this pawn here. So he's just using that pawn all this time to put so much pressure in his position, and eventually, slowly by slowly, but then these are this is some very technical moves here. If you look at this, seems like Magana forgot about his knight and dropped it, but maybe he's also kind of arguing that um, he's arguing that these two pawns maybe could contest something, but I don't really think so. So he just goes knight here. Yeah, so this is where the game ends. I don't know when the microphone tuned out, but this is where I'm going to stop. And yeah, so this is a pretty interesting game. And this game has all been won because of this subtle mistake here. This d6 move, which, sometimes I tell people the importance of studying theory, and they're like, theory is not so important. But at a high level, you can see why one move like d6 could probably confuse your opponent. And if you have studied your lines well enough, you can know that this is actually a free pawn. And yeah, so I'm going to stop there, but thank you for tuning in.